Okay, I got to the mystery of what I did here. I inadvertently pulled this out when I should have undid this clamp and rotated the wire to unscrew it, because this little end screws into the distributor. So my problem is now that this is pulled off. So what I did was I dug out all of the rubber and stuff that was inside there, left behind. Got some wire bared here, and I'm going to flow solder onto these wires and then put this cap on there and see if I can't get the solder to stick to the inside of this cap. Basically solder this back on, because I can't, this thing was crimped in a very unusual way, obviously done with a special tool. So it's kind of like, once it's crimped, there's really no way to uncrimp it. It's almost like a star-shaped crimp. So hopefully I'll be able to get this to stick. So I tinned the wires, flowed some solder into them, and then I basically filled this end halfway with solder. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to get the solder back into a molten state and stick the wire into it. Well, it ain't pretty, but it's sticking. Good, strong connection actually, so I think I'm going to be able to get away with this, and this should insert far enough in there that with the boot on I shouldn't get any arcing. Alrighty. Well, I started to mount the ignition coil, and then I remembered about how this thing has to be screwed in, so you're going to kind of turn it round and round and round. So I've got to do this connection to the distributor before I bolt this on. Now I need to, before I put this screw in, I need to make sure this ground wire is installed underneath the screw. This is what grounds the coil to this frame. These are the wires going to the point contacts, and I keep stripping them back further and further trying to find decent wire. So then I had to start cutting this outside sheath off, and as I cut it off, what I find inside is just, the wire is just junk completely. It's garbage. So now I got to take this point distributor and alternator assembly off again and remove this clamp right here and redo that wiring. I took these two screws out. That allows you to drop this plate down, and once I got this plate down, I pulled this down and I can see this is all just completely corroded inside there. So I've got no choice now. That wire actually goes underneath and then comes up through here and makes the connections to the actual point contacts. So I've got no choice now. I've got to take this whole assembly off, which it looks like. Screw here, there's a screw there, and a screw on the other side. Looks like the 3 screws in this whole plate assembly should slide up. Well, I removed this screw and it's this little clip, but judging from the style of clip that it is, it appears to me that when you loosen these 3, not only is it to remove this, but it's also going to allow you to spin this whole thing, which is probably to change the timing. So I am going to disturb the static timing when I do that. I was trying to avoid that. Alright, this wire on this side, I want to screw on this side that holds that will hold down also holds down this this wire clamp right here. So I'll make note of that when I go to put this back together. Alright, I'm going to cheat a little bit, and before I take that last screw out, I'm going to make a mark with a felt tip marker on this plastic disc part and index it to right here, this little seam, so that when I put this back together, I'm going to put it back in exactly the same position. I decided to use fingernail polish instead. Alright, you just pull up and out, and that comes right up and out. Of course, this spring deal here is a little bit in the way. I'm going to make sure that spring, when I put this back on, it sits down in this area here, because that's where it was when I had it all together. So now I've got this whole assembly out. I can flip it over and can see where those, well, look at all that crud in there. Wow. I'm going to clean this up. Alright, where I made my mark on here is just on this plastic ring, which actually turns freely on this. It's just like a spacer. So I need to mark that part of the plate right there so I can put this all together. I brought this into the workbench, see if we can't work on it. I'm going to take this ring off. This ring appears to just pop off carefully. Alright, so now the wires are almost like melted into this little channel right here, so I'm going to disconnect them from this side. And it looks like one of the two conductors goes right here to this screw, and the other one I think is this one here going over to this screw, because it looks like this wire is just connected to the screw underneath it, bends over and goes over to this point contact, and then there's another wire that connects it over to the other one. So take this screw and this screw out. Okay, I've got the two leads off. Now I'm going to move this other lead out of the way temporarily, and that'll expose where the leads actually pass through the hole to get to the other side. So now let's see if I can pull that through. Alright, I got those wires that were caked in there to break free, but it's not going to fit through with the terminals on the end, so I'm going to cut the terminals off. And there we go. Now the channel is cleaned out. Got the garbage out of there. This is what's left of the wire. You can see all the way into there it was bad. The insulation was completely crud. It was going to be only a matter of time before this started to short out against the metal here of this distributor ring, or this point ring, whatever you want to call it. So I'm going to rebuild this now. Here's some wire of the correct gauge, and I could just run it right through like this, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some heat shrink tubing around the section of this to protect it where it's going to be clamped in place by this metal piece that sits on top of here. Okay, I used a section of 1/4 inch heat shrink tubing, and I used my heat gun, and that gives me a nice reproduction of what kind of was in there in the first place. One of these leads is going to be a little too long now because one of them goes over to this screw and the other one is much closer to this screw, but I can cut one of them back. So now I'm going to insert that through the hole. And first I'll clean this corrosion out of this channel, and then I'll get the clamp piece, because I don't see any reason why I can't install that now. Alright, this little plate, which also has this little piece of linkage, actually this linkage pops out pretty easily. I took it out of the other end because it was coming out easier, but basically you just slide this metal rod, you pop this metal rod right on out of that plastic clip carefully, and it'll come right out. So now I'm going to clean the corrosion off of this and mount that in position, clamping my new wiring harness. Well, it looked like it was going to be a great idea, but it's not going to fit. I can't get this to compress down enough to let me put that cover on. Actually, it looks like it fits in there pretty well until you go to put the cover on. The other problem is it needs to make this turn. It's kind of crazy, but it kind of makes this 90-degree turn right here to come out this way. And right when it's turning, that's when it's really buckling. So I'm going to have to trim back my my heat shrink tubing and just let the wires be inside here unprotected. Alright, I can have some of the heat shrink tubing in underneath this clamp, so it'll be kind of a compromise. I can get the clamp on this way, and that way the part of the wiring where it exits the clamped area will be protected. Okay, cover's installed, and that's how that's going to look. Now I need to measure this wire precisely so I can make sure I put a small eyelet like this on there. That's not going to leave too much slack. And the same with this one on this side. I wish I had put that in there the other way, the black wire on the left, but I just crossed it over because I wanted the black wire to go over to here, because this one's clearly just grounding to the plate, so that I'll be easy for me to remember the black is ground on this and that the white wire is the hot wire going to the points. Alright, that's done. Now I can reinstall this in the motor. First I have to reinstall this plastic snap ring that goes on here, and it's clear to me that there's grease on this, so I think this would call for a light coat of grease as I reinstall it. Alright, I'm going to make sure this surface is cleaned up, and I'm going to put a very light film of grease on here. This is where the cams there, the cam followers on the point contacts actually rub up against constantly, so I'm not surprised that there should be a little film of lubricant there. Oh, I wanted to make a note that after I got this all apart and saw that these little metal hold down clamps that I was loosening, that I was worried about disturbing in that position, all they appear to do is hold down this plastic ring. And that plastic ring, as you just saw, you could snap it on and pretty much spin it around 360 degrees. My point being is I don't really see how that could be any kind of a setting. Now, there's changing the rotation of that. I don't see how that would change any timing settings, so I think I was wrong about that. I think they are just plain hold downs. I'm not quite sure why they would have made it the way they made it, but it seems like they made it so you could loosen it, rotate it a little bit, retighten it, but I can't see the point for that. So anyways, just to be on the safe side, I am reinserting this, and I am going to line up my my fingernail polish marks. Okay, I've gone and fouled something up here, because it sure seems like that ring is supposed to be down inside there like I've got it. And if that's the case, yeah, I mean, it looks like that's right, because that was the cutout switch right there. Alright, so what I'm having trouble figuring out is how these clips go back on, because I can't seem to get them in. The screws that hold them go in these holes. These holes down here are for the distributor assembly. Right? Or did I mix these up? Time to go back to the video. Actually, I didn't have to go back to the video. All I have to do is that when I put the distributor back in position and see that it wants to sit up on these bosses right here. So these lower screws are the ones that these screws with the little clips go onto. So okay, now I know what I'm doing. Well, I tightened down this point contact plate, and I think I did that prematurely because I forgot about this stupid spring deal here, and I'm pretty sure that sits in a groove down in here. And I think the easiest way to put this on is going to be to take the plate, lift it back up, and pop the spring down in there, and then lower the whole thing down again. I forgot to mention before, when you put this rotor on, this is actually keyed, as you know, obviously it should be, to the shaft. So there's a slot on the back of this shaft, so you got to make sure you got this on right. Otherwise, if you try and force that distributor down on it, you could crack this. Now I got to rework this plug on the alternator, because even though this doesn't look corroded and looks like it's in great shape, the problem is the other half of the plug that plugs onto here from that wiring harness is completely shot. The wires coming out of it were no good, so I'm going to have to cut this plug off and cut back and splice these wires. And I'm hoping that these are going to be in pretty good shape, because that doesn't look corroded, so I don't think I'm going to have the same problem I did with the contact points on the other side. Yeah, I cut back the outer sheathing here, and it looks pretty good. And then it occurred to me that I can actually hold off on that, because that's not going to be one of the vital things to seeing if this thing will start. So what I want to concentrate on really is I want to concentrate on this whole starter circuit and the point circuit. So at this point I'm getting a phone call. At this point, I think I can reinstall the flywheel. Alright, I kind of melted this plug when I put this in the oven way back when to get that potting material softened up. Not that that really matters, because again, I got a similar problem here on the original wiring harness, what was left of it. The plug was there and the wires attached to it were just all shot. So rather than splice on the little tiny pieces of wire, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just omit that half of the plug. I'm going to see how, these look like they might be 1/4 inch, so I might be able to get 1/4 inch spade adapters that I can crimp onto wires to actually seat on here pretty decent. So I'm going to check that. So they fit pretty tight. So right now that's going to be the plan. I crimp these connectors, these spade connectors onto new wires, and then just insert them that way. And then I'll tape this whole mess up with electrical tape.